Hello, glad to see you on the channel. Subscribe, leave a like, and don't forget to write a comment. Enjoy watching.
When I was 34, I found out I was dying. My parents said they were sorry. Then they bought my sister a car. That sentence still feels like fiction when I say it out loud, like something a bitter person would make up to get sympathy or to win an argument on the internet. But it happened, every word of it, as absurd and painful and real as the four-line they stuck into my arm the day I collapsed in the hallway outside my apartment door. It started with fatigue, but not the kind of tired you can fix with sleep or coffee or a good weekend off social media. It was the kind of tired that made brushing my teeth feel like running a marathon. I remember standing in the shower one morning, just staring at the tile because I couldn't lift my arms to wash my hair. I chalked it up to stress, like everyone does, but eventually even my stubborn ass had to admit something was really wrong. By the time I got to a specialist, the answer came like a slap across the face, a rare autoimmune disorder that was attacking my nerves, joints, muscles, and energy like termites in the walls of a house that still looked fine from the outside. The good news? There was a treatment. The bad news? It was expensive, not fully covered by insurance, and had to be done in a very specific window of time. If we can start within the next 6 weeks, the doctor said, adjusting his glasses like he was reading me a grocery list, there's a strong chance you'll go into long-term remission. But the meds and infusions are not cheap. He printed out some papers like that made it easier. I walked out of that office numb, clutching the estimate like it was my death sentence folded into a manila envelope. It wasn't 6 figures, but it might as well have been. I had some savings. Daniel, my fiancé at the time, was amazing, offering to dip into his 401k. But there was still a gap, and that gap felt like the space between 2 cliffs with no bridge. So I did the thing that felt both natural and impossible. I called my parents. Now, to be fair, we weren't estranged. We weren't best friends either. They were just parents. The kind who remembered birthdays with a text and who asked about work more than they asked about my actual life. But still, I figured, this is what families are for, right? When you're truly in trouble. When you're sick and scared and need help. I called my mom first. She listened, mostly quiet, asked a couple of questions, and said something like, "Wow, that sounds really serious." I waited. She didn't offer anything, just said she'd talk to my dad. I called again the next day, no answer. A text 2 days later, "We're thinking of you, sweetheart. Stay strong. Stay strong." Like I had just lost my job or gone through a breakup. Not like I was sitting in bed trying to Google how to afford not dying on a 10-year-old laptop. A week later, exactly 1 week, I saw it. On Samantha's Instagram. A shiny, fire-red Lexus parked in front of my parents' garage. Giant bow on the hood. Caption: "Look what mom and dad surprised me with." I guess adulting does have perks. She even added a little winky face. My sister, 29, living rent-free in their guest house. No job. No major accomplishments. No life-threatening illnesses. She'd mentioned once in passing that her old car made weird noises and suddenly she was gifted a brand new Lexus because, as my mother put it later, she's just been going through a rough patch emotionally. I read that caption 3 times. Then a 4th. My hands were shaking so hard I dropped my phone. I picked it up and just stared at the screen like it was going to correct itself. Maybe it wasn't from them. Maybe she had a sugar daddy. Maybe it was Elise and she was just pretending. But no, the comments told the truth. OMG, your parents are the best. So jelly. You deserve it, girl. And then my mom, under the photo, posted, "You've been so strong lately. You earned it. Earned it." I called again. This time, I didn't bother being polite. I asked them straight up, did they really buy her a car while knowing I was trying to figure out how to afford staying alive? My dad said, "It was just a gift." My mom said, "We didn't realize your treatment was that urgent." Then came the kicker. "We've already helped you a lot over the years, Maya." as if there was some invisible tally in the sky keeping score, and my total had already been hit. I guess college loans 15 years ago trumped keeping your daughter out of a hospital bed. That conversation didn't end well. I don't remember all the words, but I do remember how I felt after. Like I'd just been told, not in so many words, that I didn't matter enough. That my life, my pain, my fear wasn't quite worthy of that kind of sacrifice. Maybe if I smiled more. Maybe if I'd been the baby of the family. Maybe if I'd learned to cry in public like Samantha did at the drop of a hat, they would have noticed me drowning. But instead, they looked at my sinking ship and said, "Well, she's always been strong. She'll figure it out." And that was the moment I realized I was the family's backup plan. The spare kid. The emotional intern. Replaceable. And that changes a person. Whether you want it to or not. When I finally gathered enough anger to fuel the drive to their house, I already knew how the conversation was going to go. I could picture the looks on their faces before I even stepped inside, the defensive tilt of my father's head, the overly patient tone in my mother's voice, the way she'd clutch her coffee mug like it was a shield and not just a warm drink. They greeted me like nothing was wrong, like we were just catching up on life, as if the last week hadn't cracked something in me that was never going to fully heal. I sat across from them at the same kitchen table where we used to have birthday breakfasts, and I didn't waste time with pleasantries or small talk. I went right in, like someone pulling off a bandage in one motion, because pretending wasn't just exhausting, it felt like another betrayal. "Did you really buy Samantha a Lexus while knowing I couldn't afford the treatment that might literally save my life?" I said it slowly, without raising my voice, because I wanted the words to hit like a knife, not a scream. My dad shifted in his chair like he'd suddenly gotten uncomfortable, cleared his throat, and said, "It's just a car, Maya." That sentence hung in the air like a bad smell, thick and sour and unmistakably insulting. My mother added, "We didn't think your condition was that serious." "You didn't really explain it that way." I felt something inside me crack wide open then, like a dam releasing years of unspoken hurt, things I hadn't even realized I'd held onto until right then. "You think I asked for help to cover a gym membership?" I said, my voice starting to shake in that humiliating way when anger turns to helplessness. "You think I'd come crawling to you unless I absolutely had to?" They looked at each other, not at me, and it was that look, that silent, shared understanding that they were still the team and I was the outlier, that broke me more than anything else. "We already helped you through college," my dad said, as if the 4 years of tuition paid 15 years ago had earned them immunity from ever lifting a finger again. My mother nodded, adding, "And we were hoping maybe Daniel's family could help? You two are getting pretty serious, right?" That was her version of hope, passing the buck, finding another branch in the tree that could support the weight so she didn't have to feel the guilt of turning away. I didn't know whether to laugh or scream or cry, so instead I said nothing. I stood up, walked out of that house, and didn't look back until I was sitting in my car with my head pressed against the steering wheel, the kind of crying that makes your chest hurt and your stomach twist like you swallowed something rotten. Daniel found me like that an hour later because I hadn't responded to any of his texts. He drove me home in silence, letting me fall apart without interruption, and once we were inside and I was wrapped in the one blanket that still smelled like our dog who'd passed last year, he knelt down in front of me and said, "We'll figure this out, I promise." And somehow I believed him. Maybe because he wasn't pretending it was fine. Maybe because he was the first person to say we and actually mean it. We spent the next 2 days digging into every possible grant, foundation, and charity we could find that dealt with rare autoimmune diseases. I wrote letters that begged without sounding desperate, shared medical records with strangers, and filled out more paperwork than I did for my first mortgage. Daniel made calls on his lunch break. He even found this small program run by a woman who had the same disease, and they promised to review my application within the week. I didn't get my hopes up, but I also didn't give up. Meanwhile, Samantha kept posting car selfies. One day it was her in front of a fancy coffee shop, captioned, "Lattes taste better when you drive here in style." Another day it was her at the beach, the car gleaming in the background, with mood, sun, sand, and my sexy new ride. I muted her account before I threw my phone through a window. She still hadn't said a word to me. Not even a "how are you holding up?" Not a single message, not even a lazy emoji check-in. Just silence. Shiny, polished, oblivious silence. Then, on a Thursday morning, right as I was about to head to the pharmacy to pick up more of the meds I could afford, an email came through. I opened it with the usual blend of dread and numb hope. It started with, "We're pleased to inform you," and for a second, I forgot how to breathe. The grant had been approved. They were going to cover 60% of the total treatment cost. It wasn't everything, but it was enough to keep me in the fight. Enough to stop the clock from ticking so loudly in my ears every night as I lay in bed wondering if my body was going to betray me in my sleep. The relief was enormous, but it didn't last long. 60% still left a massive gap. I did the math over and over even though I knew the numbers. The treatment would have cost around $4,800, less than half the price of that $30,000 Lexus. Less than half. Which, by the way, is not actually correct math, and I know that now, but at the time I wasn't in the headspace to care about details. I was just angry, heartbroken, and doing whatever I could to survive. So I had 30 days, 1 month, to come up with the rest. That was it. No extensions. No second chances. Just 30 days between me and a treatment that could change everything. And the people who could have made it possible with a single check had chosen not to. Not because they couldn't. Because they didn't feel like it. Because I wasn't the daughter who cried at the right time or asked for help in the right tone. Because I wasn't the one they wanted to save. And the clock kept ticking. It was exactly 4 days after I got the grant approval that Samantha called me, and I swear to God, it was like hearing a Barbie doll learn how to form sentences. She called me while I was in line at the pharmacy, waiting to pick up the pre-treatment meds the clinic told me I needed to start taking immediately. My stomach was still a pit of stress and protein shakes, and I was holding in emotions so tightly I could feel them pressing behind my ribs like wet cement. Her name popped up on my screen, and for half a second, I actually thought maybe she'd finally realized what was going on. "Hey, big sis," she said, all sing-songy, like she hadn't just ghosted my entire crisis for 2 weeks. "I feel like we haven't talked in forever." She didn't ask how I was, didn't mention the treatment, didn't bring up the fact that our parents had essentially chosen her aesthetic over my existence. "Mom's been acting weird," she continued. "She keeps asking me to come over for dinner, like every night. I think she feels bad about something. No idea why." I wanted to scream. Instead, I let her talk. Then she dropped it. The sentence that made my ears ring. "By the way, I didn't even ask for that Lexus. Like, I literally told them I was fine with my old car. But I mean, it's cute, right? Cute." She called the bright red, $30,000 monument to parental favoritism cute. I said nothing at first, partly because I knew if I opened my mouth I wouldn't be able to stop. She kept rambling, something about leather seats and Apple CarPlay, and how her friend from yoga was literally obsessed. I finally cut her off with a quiet, "I'm glad you like it," and hung up before the weight of it all crushed me right there in front of the blood pressure machine. I didn't hate her. That was the worst part. I needed to, but Samantha wasn't evil. She wasn't malicious. She was just clueless. Soft around the edges in a way that made people want to give her things. And for as long as I could remember, they always had. I got practical things, jeans one size too big, so you can grow into them, or textbooks, or gift cards to the local grocery store. Samantha got necklaces with her initials in gold, designer perfume when she was 13, a freaking iPhone before anyone else in our school had one. One Christmas, when I was 16 and wanted nothing more than a pair of sketch pads and good drawing pencils, my mom handed me a new winter coat. "You needed one anyway," she said with a smile, while Samantha squealed in the background opening a charm bracelet and matching earrings. I told myself it didn't matter. I told myself I was just more mature. But resentment doesn't disappear when you swallow it. It just finds a place to rot. Now, as an adult, those memories bled into everything. I wanted to forgive her. I even told Daniel one night that maybe I should just let it go, that holding onto it was like drinking poison and hoping it hurt someone else. But then I saw her again, this time on social media, leaning against the hood of the car in some downtown parking lot, holding a smoothie and grinning like life was just a fun little montage. The caption read, "When life hands you lemons, ask your parents for Alexis." Hashtag blessed, hashtag spoiled but cute. I stared at it for a long time, longer than I should have. Then I got up, walked to my closet, opened the top drawer of my jewelry box, and pulled out the only thing I had left from Grandma June, the ring. It was an old pearl and diamond ring, nothing flashy, but she'd worn it every single day I knew her. She gave it to me on my 25th birthday with shaking hands and said, "You keep this, Maya. You've got a backbone and a good heart. You'll need both." I hadn't worn it in years, too afraid I'd lose it or scratch it or let it get swallowed by a sink drain. But now, it wasn't a symbol of love anymore. It was leverage. It was my last move on a board I didn't even want to be playing on. I pawned it the next morning. The guy behind the counter looked at it like it was just another trinket, some old lady's estate stuff that had landed in the hands of someone broke and desperate. I didn't even flinch when he told me the number, just took the money, folded it, and left before I could talk myself out of it. That ring was the only thing I kept from Grandma June. And I sold it while Samantha posted car selfies with hashtag blessed in the caption. That's the kind of sentence that doesn't feel real until you say it out loud. And then it won't stop echoing. The treatment started 2 days later. I sat in a stiff recliner while they pumped chemicals into my veins, pretending the antiseptic smell didn't make me nauseous and that the nurse's voice didn't sound too cheerful for a place filled with sick people. I made it through the first week. Then the second. The side effects were brutal, and there were days when even Daniel couldn't talk me off the edge of complete emotional collapse. But I kept showing up. I kept taking the pills. I kept fighting because that's what people like me do. We keep trying. Even when the people closest to us hand us weights instead of life jackets. And in the end, I survived. I made it. The doctors said the treatment had worked better than expected, and I was officially in remission. No guarantees, of course. There never are. But I wasn't dying anymore. And you'd think that would have been the happy ending, that I'd walk away stronger and wiser and grateful. But the truth is, something inside me stayed broken. Something small but important. The kind of thing you don't notice is missing until someone asks you to trust them. And all you can do is laugh. 2 years passed like slow-moving fog, thick and heavy with the kind of silence that doesn't just fill a room, but expands into every memory, rewriting the way you remember things that once felt simple. In that time, the disease stayed quiet, tucked away like a wolf watching from the trees, and I started putting myself back together, brick by slow brick, like someone rebuilding their house from the basement up. Daniel never left my side, not once, not when I lost half my hair, not when I screamed at him in the middle of the night from medication nightmares, and not when I sat at the kitchen table holding Grandma June's ring money like it was blood money. He loved me like it was the only thing that made sense in the chaos, and that kind of love, the kind you can feel in your bones, eventually forces you to believe in it, even when your brain keeps whispering not to. So when he proposed on a cold Sunday morning with my favorite cinnamon rolls still warm in the box and his hands shaking as he held out a ring I knew he couldn't comfortably afford, I didn't hesitate for a second. I said yes so fast he barely had time to finish the question, and then I cried into his shoulder while the coffee went cold. That was the moment I let myself want a future again, not just survival, not just functioning, but something beautiful and ours. We didn't rush into anything. We planned slow, saved what we could, found a cheap venue with fairy lights and mismatched chairs, and called it perfect. The one thing I didn't do was tell my parents. I knew it would come up eventually, that someone would say something or post something and the secret would leak out the way secrets always do in families, not like a bomb, but like a slow drip from a leaky pipe you can't find the source of. And sure enough, it was Samantha who did it. I should have known she'd be the one. She wasn't trying to stir the pot, she never does, but she posted a photo of us at a bridal expo, holding tiny plastic champagne flutes, captioned with something ridiculous like, "Can't believe my sis is getting hitched." Hashtag Madophonor vibes. And just like that, the phone calls began. The first came from my mother, 2 hours after the post went up. Her voice was tight, brittle with that false cheer she puts on when she knows she's being watched, like she's on stage in a play no one wants to see. "Why didn't you tell us, sweetheart?" she asked, like I'd forgotten to mention what groceries I bought. "We want to help. We want to be there for you." I stood in the middle of the living room, phone to my ear, and stared at the stack of unpaid venue deposits and DIY flower samples on the table. "Help," I said, flatly. "Help like you helped with my hospital bills?" There was a pause. That long, jagged silence where you know the person on the other end has no good answer, only excuses and half-formed sentences that aren't worth saying. "Maya, that was different," she finally whispered, and I could practically hear her clutching that same goddamn coffee mug. I hung up before she could finish. Not out of spite, out of mercy for both of us. Over the next few weeks, the campaign began. My dad called once, left a voicemail that started with "We miss you" and ended with "Family is all that matters." Samantha texted a few times, mostly confused but gentle, saying things like, "They really do want to be involved, you know, and I think Mom's crying a lot lately." But I'd stopped being the kind of person who softened just because someone else felt sad. My sadness had never been enough for them to lift a finger. So no, they didn't get to use their tears as a ticket now. I sent out the invitations the following Monday. Handmade. Personal. Thoughtful. Everyone we loved got one, friends from Daniel's side, old coworkers who'd held my hand when I was at my lowest, even an old high school teacher who once told me I had fire in me that people would try to put out. Everyone except my parents. That envelope stayed sealed and in the drawer until I finally threw it out, one rainy night while Daniel slept, without fanfare or finality. Just a quiet decision made under the sound of thunder. They didn't call again. Not right away. I think, deep down, they knew this wasn't about the wedding. It was about all the years before it, about who they chose to love out loud and who they expected to just understand. And I'd spent too much of my life understanding. Understanding why Samantha needed more. Understanding why they couldn't help. Understanding why I had to be the strong one. Well, strong doesn't mean stupid. And forgiving doesn't mean forgetting. On the morning of the wedding, everything was exactly as it should be. The sun was out, my dress fit perfectly, the music was cued, and my hair didn't frizz despite the humidity. I was nervous, but in the good way, the way you feel when you're about to do something big and real and brave. I had just finished my makeup when Daniel's sister poked her head into the bridal suite, eyes wide and lips pressed tight like she didn't know whether to be amused or horrified. "There's someone here," she said. "Not on the list." I stood up too fast and felt my heart seize for a moment, then settle. "Who?" I asked, already knowing. She stepped aside, and I looked out into the hallway. And there stood someone I never thought I'd see on this day. It wasn't my mother in the hallway that morning, and it wasn't my father either, even though part of me had expected, maybe even secretly hoped, that they'd show up with some too-late apology and a bouquet of the wrong flowers, the kind of grand gesture that makes for a tidy ending in movies but never quite happens in real life. No, it was Samantha. Alone. Wearing a simple dress that was clearly not meant for a wedding, eyes puffy and red like she'd been crying since dawn. Her hair was barely brushed, her shoes didn't match, and for the first time in a long time, she didn't look like the girl who always got everything handed to her with a smile and a bow. She looked like someone who had just realized something hard and honest, that the world she lived in wasn't as fair as she thought, and maybe never had been. I stepped out of the bridal suite without saying anything, the layers of my ivory dress whispering against the floor with each step, and stopped in front of her while everyone else froze behind me. She opened her mouth to speak, then shut it, then finally said, "They're not coming. They said they were too sick to travel." Her voice cracked halfway through, and I felt that familiar ache, the one that used to reach out to comfort her automatically. But I didn't move. I just watched her, waiting for the truth to drop. And it did. "But I know they're not sick," she added, her voice barely a whisper. "I know they're just sitting at home, probably in the Lexus, watching the time." I didn't say anything. I didn't need to. Because finally, she saw it. She saw the invisible scorecard our parents had been using our whole lives, the way love was handed out like rationed sugar, just enough for her to feel sweet and not enough for me to stop feeling hollow. "They blamed me," she said. "They said I should have convinced you. That it's my fault we weren't invited." She laughed then, a bitter little sound like something caught in her throat. "I told them maybe if they'd tried to save your life instead of my social status, they'd be sitting in the front row right now." It was the first time she'd said anything real. The first time she wasn't protecting them or pretending like everything was okay. She looked at me then, really looked, and said, "I'm sorry. I didn't get it before. I do now. And I know it's late, and I know it doesn't fix anything. But I mean it." I believed her. Not because I wanted to, but because I could see it in her face, the crack, the fracture, the first real sign of someone stepping out of a shadow they didn't even know they were living in. I reached out, touched her hand for a moment, and said, "Thank you." Then I walked past her, toward the door that led to the aisle, toward the life I was choosing without them. The music started, soft and slow, and my breath caught in my throat as I stepped into view. Daniel was already at the altar, eyes wide and full of everything I needed to carry me forward. And behind him, rows of faces smiled and turned and waited. Not one of those faces belonged to my parents. And that was okay. In fact, it was exactly how it was supposed to be. Revenge isn't slamming a door in someone's face. It's building a life you don't need to invite them into. It's walking down that aisle with your head high and your hands steady, knowing that the people who love you are already there, and the ones who didn't show up had already left you long before the wedding invites were printed. They told everyone they were too sick to travel. But I know they sat in that Lexus, watching the clock, waiting to be missed. I didn't give them that gift. I didn't give them the satisfaction of making this day about their absence. I didn't let their silence echo louder than our vows. I let them sit in that car, surrounded by all the love they gave to the wrong person at the wrong time, and I walked into my future without a single glance behind me. Later, at the reception, as the night softened into something magical and the music wrapped around us like warmth, Daniel and I danced under the lights we'd hung ourselves, surrounded by people who'd chosen to be there for the right reasons. Samantha stood off to the side, holding a glass of wine she hadn't finished, her eyes a little sad but her mouth curved into a half-smile, like someone who understood now that not everything pretty is meant to be kept, and not everything broken stays broken forever. Sometimes forgiveness is quiet. It doesn't come with balloons or speeches or emotional family reunions on the dance floor. Sometimes it's just the absence of bitterness. Sometimes it's the decision to not let pain decide how you love the people who still show up. But absence, that screams. Louder than applause. Louder than any toast. Louder than the music swelling around us. Their absence was a choice, and mine was too. After the last dance, when most of the guests had left and the night had settled into a gentle hush, I pulled off my heels, kicked them under a chair, and reached for my phone. There were dozens of texts and photos and congratulations waiting, but one message sat at the very top, unopened. My father's name. Just a single message. No preview. No timestamp. Just his name, sitting there like a weight. I didn't open it. I didn't need to.